The patriarch of the family, so Quanah Parker's great-grandpa, was a man by the name of Elder John Parker. Now, elder does not describe his age. Elder is a position within the Primitive Baptist Church. He is a preacher, if you will. He was born in Baltimore County, Maryland in 1758. The same year that here in what we now call Texas, thousands of Comanche raided a Spanish mission in modern-day Menard County, Texas, killing 8 people, including 2 priests. My point of mentioning that is that as the Parkers started their migration from the east, the Comanche were already here, coming down from the north and the west into what we now call Texas. John, as Val mentioned earlier, was a patriot, having served in the Revolutionary War out of Culpeper County, Virginia. So if Quanah were alive today, I always think about this, if Quanah were alive today, he would qualify for the Sons of the American Revolution and also the Sons of the Republic of Texas. Which, by the way, Don and I are members of the SRT. Is this terribly organized or what? We are so disorganized compared to all these ladies here. We had to work on that. After the war, John and his young wife Sarah and their first 3 children migrated to Georgia. It was a new beginning. For nearly 2 decades, they raised their family there and had more children. In about 1804, their very large family at this point passed through Cherokee Nation and into modern-day Tennessee, very near Nashville. It was, once again, a new beginning. And for the Parkers, it was a new beginning to establish churches, congregations. I said they were Baptists, but that the premise of their beliefs was what we call predestination. To the Parkers, you are either born of the good seed or you are born of the bad seed. That is predetermined. And my 4th great-grandfather, Elder Daniel Parker, was the one who spearheaded most of that movement. Also in 1804, Sarah Parker gave birth to Silas Mercer Parker. That is Quanah Parker's grandpa. He would eventually become his grandpa. Silas was about 7 years old when his brother John, not to be confused with his dad John, with his brother John died at the hands of the Delaware Indians in modern-day Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Silas's brother James later wrote this about the death of his brother John. It awakened in me feelings of the most bitter hostility toward the Indians, and this engendered in my heart a deadly hostility towards this race of God's creatures. Yet, in Tennessee, as the Parkers were, it was actually congregational squabbles that made them flee Tennessee for what we now know as Illinois. During Illinois, are you following? I'm sorry, you're one of us. Okay, yes. I'm at slide number 4. Okay. I'm sorry, kind of skipping over.
It says number 2, the migration.
Migration patterns, and then if you go to 4.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
This one. This one.
Go back one more if you don't mind.
That one.
Yes. Okay. I wish you all could see this, and actually, hold on a second, Val.
I went to his Facebook site and his albums.
Bear with me here real quick.
If I would have known, I could have put it up.
I know, I wasn't thinking about it myself, however. My apologies. I was going to show you, there's a, what that slide is there that she's looking at on Facebook is what's called Fort Lamont in Illinois. If you look it up online eventually, you'll find that it looks a whole lot like Fort Parker. So that's where, and that picture is not Fort Parker. So that is where the Parkers migrated from Tennessee. Now during their time in Illinois, Silas, once again, Quanah's grandfather, soon to be grandfather, Silas was a soldier during the Black Hawk War. And his job was to combat a coalition of Native Americans that were storming. They were known as the British Band, and they were storming into Illinois. So along with other militiamen, Silas was a big part of that Black Hawk War. If you do any research on the Black Hawk War, you will find that it was full of what we now call war atrocities. And I wish you guys could see this because it's on my Facebook. Silas was married to Lucinda Duty. I think she went by Lucy Duty, maybe?
Lucy.
Yeah. He was married to Lucinda Duty. And they had their first child by the name of Cynthia Ann Parker. Let me find here. Okay. I'm going to step aside for just a moment. Has anyone been to the Fort Worth Museum that is displaying her bison robe? Is that not remarkable? It's an absolutely remarkable thing. I don't know if you all can see it from here, but this is the picture. If you ever get to Fort Worth, that's actually my wife in the picture. But they're on display. It's ginormous. And I believe the story behind this was that this was the robe she was wearing during the Battle of Peace River, I believe. I'll have to double check that.
When she was captured.
I'm sorry, yes ma'am.
And the one she is in that photograph that's so famous of her.
That's correct, yeah. The other thing I was gonna show you, as I'm stepping aside a little bit from the Parker story, is Kim and I had the luxury, if you will, a cousin of mine, her name is Tina Imola from Oklahoma, invite us up to Fort Sill for a special private showing of Fort Sill's artifacts. It was absolutely amazing. I could speak for hours on just what we saw during that brief 10 minutes, but this is one I wanted to show you. This is Cynthia Ann's hairpin.
Oh, wow.
And you will not see this anywhere else.
And that's at Fort Sill?
It's at Fort Sill. They have a private collection that is in a basement area. And once again, we were lucky because one of my Comanche cousins called us up there and we were able to see all these neat items. Okay, back to the Parker family. The family was in Illinois for a little more than 15 years. They eventually moved on to Mexican Texas in the 1830s. A new beginning. Think about 1836. I get a little bit choked up even thinking about this. 1836, Texas. The Alamo. Goliad Massacre. The Runaway Scrape. And then eventually we won our independence with San Jacinto. You have, a couple of 3 months there. And then May 19th, 1836, what some refer to as the Fort Parker Massacre. Others put it a little bit more politely, called the Fort Parker Raid. That always is a funny thing to me. I'm not trying to preach anyone on this, but it's always a funny thing to me. When the Comanche killed people, it was called a massacre. When our U.S. Army went in to kill people, it was a raid or a win for a battle. So, Fort Parker. Once again, this is one of those topics that I could go on and describe about the Fort Parker issue. But it is where Cynthia Ann saw her grandfather, Elder John Parker, killed. She saw her uncle Benjamin killed. A couple of non-family members were killed. And her own father, Silas, died that day. Now there was 5 captives, she being one of them. They were taken by the Comanche. Knowing what I do know of Comanche, they saw the need to take captives, first of all, to repopulate their tribe. The other part to that is they were going to use some captives to barter later. So it's not all violence. There is some legitimacy, if you will, why the Comanche came and did that to Fort Parker that day. Which, this is another thing I've always wondered about. The gates were open. Why were the gates open? I've always pondered this. Why were the gates open? I know all the men had left to go farm. Most of the men. But why were they open? And then on a May day several years ago, I was at Fort Parker. The gates were closed and it was brutally hot. I mean, the air was just stale. And it dawned on me at that point, I don't know. Maybe that's one of the reasons they had the gates open that particular day. We'll never know. We also will never know what actually happened to Cynthia Ann that day and throughout a good part of her life. I'm sure she recognized the brutality to some of her older cousins, but she probably was relatively taken care of. I mean, I would have a hard time believing that she was abused that particular day, but she was probably roughed up a little bit. We don't know. The other thing I think about is that Cynthia Ann's world goes from Fort Parker, about 1 acre, to suddenly 250,000 square miles, right? Yeah, miles of Comancheria. Absolutely amazing. Therefore, we can only speculate once again what her life was like, but we do know this. She married Pettinacona, who was a very strong, respected Comanche leader. Petta and Cynthia Ann Nadwa gave birth to 3 children. Quanah, his brother Pecos, and his sister we call Prairie Flower. And if you'll forgive me, a lot of the Comanche terms for people's names I can't pronounce. I will never be able to pronounce. I may recognize them on paper, but I can't pronounce them, so I'm not even gonna try to. Most sources say Quanah was born in 1845, but even that is debated. Some say 1852, I think, and some say maybe 1850, I can't recall. I typically use 1845 out of convenience, because 1845 would have been a time period in which Cynthia Ann was a respectable age to have children, and it was right before the Republic of Texas was going back on into the United States. So I like to use 1845 myself. The other thing is, where was he born? You can say just south of the Wichita Mountains in Oklahoma, or I know a lot of people say in modern day Gaines County, Texas. I'm not sure myself.
Where's Gaines County?
Toward the west,
Okay.
out west. By all accounts, Quanah led a normal boy's life with his people, hunting, horse riding, you name it, pretty normal life. Now, he was taller than the average Comanche, and he had what they refer to as penetrating blue-gray eyes. And by the way, anyone who's on Facebook, I know there's a couple more people are, I'm about to hit slide number 11.
So is that him on 10?
Now more people are picking up their iPhones.
Is that him on 10?
He'd be on 10, yes ma'am. That's him on the horse? Yes ma'am, that's him. Once again, taller than your average Comanche. In December of 1860, we have, near present day Quanah, Texas, what some refer to as Pease River Battle, Pease River Engagement, Pease River Massacre. I'm not sure what you want to call it, but it was at a time in which Texas Rangers and militia stormed a camp of Comanche. It's hard not to look at the similarities between what happened that day and what happened in 1836. People were killed, people were taken captive, and it was considered a victory. Now Quanah faced a much different life. Some stories say that his dad died that day at Peace River. Quanah said he did not. He lived for a few years after that. But regardless, within a couple of years, Quanah was orphaned. His mom and his little sister were taken in 1860 back to Texas. His father was dead and his brother was dead. He was all alone. And this is important to say. Quanah survived and became a man under the leadership of a Comanche leader by the name of Black Horse. Make no doubt about it, Quanah Parker rode with warriors. He was a warrior. He raided like warriors raid, and he killed like warriors will kill. Make no doubt about it. That was his life. So the love affair that everybody likes to, or I should say, romanticize that time period in Texas and Oklahoma, it's not true. It was a violent time. At the Second Battle of Adobe Walls, 1874, my wife loves this part because I made her and all my kids visit Adobe Walls. And I'm pretty sure we drove across private property. And I have no idea. I don't know what I did that day. But anyway, I ended up somewhere up there in the Panhandle. And so we visited the Second Battle of the Adobe Walls monument, and someone got a tick. And so I'm not sure which one of our kids picked up the tick, but it was a battle for about the next 100 miles in the car that we had a tick with us. And I'm pretty sure we saved it for a couple years afterwards in a baggie. But the Second Battle of Adobe Walls, which included, has everyone seen Wyatt Earp? The movie Wyatt Earp, or read about? Remember Bat Masterson, I think his name was? Okay, he was there, and so was a man by the name of Billy Dixon, and who was on the other side? Quanah and all his men. Here's what Billy Dixon, okay, he was just an American scout. Here's what Billy wrote as he saw Quanah and his warriors. There was never a more splendidly barbaric sight. And after years, I was glad that I had seen it. Hundreds of warriors, the flower of the fighting men of the southwestern plains tribes, mounted upon their finest horses, armed with guns and lances, and carrying heavy shields of thick buffalo hide, were coming like the wind. Over all was splashed rich colors on the bodies of the men and on the bodies of the running horses. Scalps dangled from bridles. Gorgeous war bonnets fluttered their plumes. Bright feathers dangled from the tails and manes of the horses, and the bronzed, half-naked bodies of the riders glittered with ornaments of silver and brass. Behind this headlong charging host stretched the plains, on whose horizon the rising sun was lifting its morning fires. The warriors seemed to emerge from this glowing background. Absolutely fabulous. Kind of makes you want to be in a battle, does it not? No, it does not. Who said that? Yeah, it could be frightening all at the same time. But I love these stories because we have the luxury of having our forefathers write down history. See, the Comanche, they're storytellers. They didn't write down their history. But I'm sure if they did, it'd be a different story. They're storytellers. And Don in the back, you can attest to this. I could sit around and listen to Tina, for example, talk and talk and talk. She has some phenomenal stories. Quanah surrendered to the U.S. Army in 1875. And it should be stated, he was the holdout, him and his men. But it was more than that, because Quanah recognized a change, and he recognizes he needed to guide his people to a better life, because the life they were leading had a dead end. For that reason, they left the plains and headed to the reservation. He never abandoned his culture. He was a diplomat, a businessman, a rancher, friends of people like Goodnight. He's a family man. He has 7 wives, about 24 kids. Which, by the way, whenever I hear it, he had all these wives. Some women lost their husbands due to disease or battle. So he was a very generous man. He wanted to take care of his people. So that's what he did. Not necessarily the reason he had all 7 wives, but could be a reason why he had some of his 7 wives. The other thing, I'm on slide 13, by the way, I'm sorry. The other thing I find fascinating is this. In the 1860s and 1870s, Quanah was a warrior. But in 1905, he rode in President Teddy Roosevelt's inaugural parade. Is that not amazing? And I have that picture of the 5 or 6 Native Americans. Yes, that one right there. Quanah is there in the middle on that white horse. And on the right side to Quanah is Geronimo. I forget the names of the other people, but the other thing Quanah never forgot about was his mother. So he reached out to the Parkers in Texas, put ads in newspapers, and in 1910, he located the burial spot of his mom, Cynthia Ann, who oddly enough had died about 1870-ish, right around there, 1871 perhaps, while Quanah was still a warrior out on the plains. She was, by the way, she was buried very near Tyler, Texas, where I'm sure everybody knows where Tyler is. He was able to move her remains in 1910 to the Post Oak Mission Cemetery near Cache, Oklahoma. Sadly, about 2 months after that, Quanah became ill and he too passed away. Yeah, you're looking at the
funeral?
the first one. Yes, ma'am. So that's the funeral of, for people who don't have that, by the way. I forget what I put on my iPad. So there's Cynthia Ann being reburied. See that one? The next one is Quanah. Oops, Quanah's funeral, that is.
Oh, wow.
What's the name of the burial place again?
Where they were originally buried was the Post Oak Mission Cemetery near Cache, Oklahoma. But about 2 months after they buried Cynthia Ann, Quanah passed away, approximately 2 months later.
And it doesn't show any Native American, or at least Native American dress at this funeral.
No, I see some on the right here. I know what picture you're looking at. I do see some on the right. And I have cousins that can probably name every single one of those people. I'm not one of those people that can. But that is his family.
It was all wives and children.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably had a whole lot by that point. And I just heard this not too long ago. In 1915, I think it was, grave robbers desecrated his grave. So just a few years after he was buried. I think it was 1915. I probably should double check that before I say it. But his grave was robbed. In 1957, due to the expansion of an artillery range, Cynthia Ann, Quanah, and Prairie Flower were removed to Fort Sill, and they are buried at an area that we refer to as Chief's Knoll. They're at Fort Sill. So if you're at Fort Sill and you want to spend the time to try to get in there, it's very well worth your visit to go look at this grave.
And Geronimo's buried there also, right?
I want to say yes, but I don't know the answer to that. So I know that Val wanted me to put like 150 years in like 15 minutes or something like that. So I've done my best. But what I like to end with is this picture here. This is my absolute favorite
Yeah.
picture.
Mine too.
Can you see this picture? I'll move it around. This is Quanah. Okay. Fabulous picture. This speaks volumes of not only the man himself, but also his people and his mom's people. Because in this picture you have Quanah dressed as a Comanche. You can even see his braids were wrapped in the otter fur on the side. Remarkable. To his left is a picture of his mother and his sister representing that side of the family. Okay, so now you have the representation of the Comanche, representation of the Parkers. Over his right shoulder is a picture of Jesus. And then if you look real close, you can see draped across his bed is a holster with a pistol. Anyway, fabulous picture. You see that? If you zoom in, you can see the pistol. Fabulous picture, fabulous man. I'll be happy to take some questions if you like, or that's all I have for my presentation today. And if anyone has any questions, yes, ma'am?
For us that didn't see it, can you leave that public for a few days?
For a few days? Yes, ma'am, I will.
And I'll share it on our Facebook page.
Now, some of those pictures, I was gonna tell you real quick. Like one of these, I just recently got from, I don't have it here. there's a picture of Quanah. I forget which number I put it on. Let's see. Slide number 11 for everyone who's looking at that. That is a recent picture that I've received at least. That is Quanah under the leadership of Black Horse. Did you see that, Don?
Which one is Quanah?
Quanah is on the far right, on the far right,
Over here.
sitting down.
Oh,
Okay.
I've seen that
Yeah.
picture. Yeah.
And then, and the other one, of the four at least, is Black Horse.
Are you
Yeah.
over here or?
Yes, ma'am, where your
in the
ring
light-
finger is?
Lighter
Yes, ma'am.
outfit?
Yes, ma'am.
Huh.
But I'll leave these pictures up. Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, my dad used to call me a wild Comanche. He was born in Oklahoma Territory.
Oh, really? Okay.
He was born in a foreign country.
Yes, ma'am.
So he probably knew something about the Comanches.
Yes.
When I was in Fredericksburg, I saw this book called, oh shoot, where is it? I'm writing it down. Empire of the Summer Moon.
Yes, ma'am. I was hoping desperately no one would mention that.
I know.
So what's your opinion on that book?
My opinion? My opinion is it was very well written and it was a good read. Now, if you want to know the opinion of others, about a month ago, I have it here in fact, from the Comanche Nation is a resolution denouncing the book Empire of the Summer Moon.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's not
And-
factual.
Well, the problem with the Parker family is that they have history and they also have a lot of folklore. So I'm not by any means saying that I am the authority of the Parker family. There are people who know a whole lot more than me and can name names. But it becomes less than history at times. And so I don't know. If you read the book, once again, I do think it's a very well written book. It hasn't been very well received by several of my family members.
And now Taylor Sheridan has bought the rights.
Yeah, and
For
that's
the
a whole
book.
other thing. So
That's a whole
yeah,
other thing.
we're really getting off into muddy waters here.
Is there another one that we can read that would be more accurate?
Yes, it's written by Jack Selden, if you could find it. I can't recall the name of the book off the top of my head. If you get onto Amazon or Barnes and Noble's website.
From The Return?
The Return.
The
Thank you,
Return.
Don. Yeah, it's called The Return. That's kind of our go-to family book. Thank you, I appreciate it. That's kind of our go-to book with the family, is The Return by Jack Selden.
The last name,
Selden,
Selvin.
D-E-N, I think. I can't recall. I think it's the N. He, by the way, he was at Baylor University, I'm gonna say 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. He donated all of his research material to Baylor. So if you ever go to Baylor, there, do you recall what the name of their center is called, Val?
Texas
The
Collection.
Texas
Texas
Collection.
Collection.
At the Texas Collection, they have boxes and boxes and boxes of Parker stuff. I've put my hands on every single piece of those papers. And there's pictures and stuff like that. So, Ken Starr was even there.
I know.
Yeah, Ken Starr is
Remember the
also.
reception?
Ken Starr is
Yeah.
a Parker.
Yeah.
Or I should say he was a Parker.
Yeah.
Do y'all, cousins all ever have a reunion?
Oh, you bet. We just had one, didn't we, Don? And the lady asked, have we ever had a reunion? And yes, we do every single year. It was what's the last one? A weekend before last, I guess, at the fort in Groesbeck. And a lot of our cousins from Oklahoma come down. This was a unusually large gathering this time. But yes, man, we still do. And we exchanged, by the way, a silver bowl from the Comanche to the Texas Parkers, and then back from the Texas Parkers to the Comanche. And that was exchanged back to one of our cousins, once again, Tina Umala, this past time. So she has it up in Oklahoma, and I'm sure she'll take care of it up there.
Nice.
Mom,
I'd like to know more, as a female, Cynthia.
here we go.
We keep talking about, you know, her dad, Quanah, and all that, but Cynthia,
Well, Cynthia's dad was Silas.
I mean
Her
Silas,
son.
we're talking about her son,
Yeah,
Quanah.
mhm.
How old was she when she was taken?
9,
9 years
Nine.
old.
yeah.
She was old enough to know,
Oh, yeah, she
obviously,
knew.
the difference in her life before and her life after. And then how old was she when she married and started having children with this?
Well, I mean, you figure 18, 19, 20-ish. That's why I prefer to use 1845 as Quanah's birth year, because it fits. He could have been older, he could have been older.
I just wish there was more information about what her actual life was like
I do
in the
too.
tribal
I do too.
unit, and
Yeah.
how was she, you know? the
She was very well received by the Comanche, and she assimilated. And she was known as a very hard worker. So she was very well respected by the Comanche. And to
So
this
it
day,
is-
you could hear it in their tone when they talk about the matriarch of their family. You could hear it,
But then when she's taken back into the
yes,
white world,
right?
so to speak.
Yeah, well,
What happens to her there? I mean, was she didn't
well, that's a
wanna
good,
go
that's a good
back?
point. So, at first she was a bit of a sideshow, and she was paraded around. The captive is back, and look at her. She's, you know, I don't know,
She said in-
very, very, very rough, if you will. The story, one of the stories is, and I don't know if it's true, that when she was first captured, she was speaking obviously Comanche, and she finally said something along the lines of, "Me Cynthia Ann." That's a story. I don't know how true that is. But I do know this, and you can see it in the couple of pictures that float around the internet on her, along with her little baby girl. She was an amusement, and people came out to look at her. She had a tough time, you know, coming back to her Parker family.
And probably protected
In
her
Texas.
son, Quanah. And her
Well, she didn't know.
she-
See, that was the other thing. She didn't know if her son Quanah or her other son were killed that day. She did not know. So she had to live with that. And then to make things worse, her little baby girl dies while they're back with the Texans. And so it was a tragedy every which way around. There's no way of sugarcoating the story, unfortunately. We could try, we can make things up, but it was a hard life.
Just a quick question back on the Parkers. When they moved to Illinois, were they militia, were the men in the militia, were they?
Well, so,
were they-
no, they opened up more land in Illinois, and at the time, my fourth great grandfather, Elder Daniel Parker, was fighting with everybody, not just the Methodists, but also all of his congregation,
Okay.
because he believed seriously on two-seedism. As I mentioned earlier, you're either born of the good seed or the bad seed. And naturally, the Parkers were, as he determined, part of the good seed. But they moved there. Now, the one thing you did mention that made me think, they moved to that Fort Lamont. And at the time, think about it, this is when the War of 1812 was winding down. So you had a lot of U.S. Rangers coming in, United States ranging units coming in. These boys of Elder John Parker, including Silas Parker, Quanah's grandpa, these young boys experienced this. They watched these Rangers come in to Fort Lamont in Illinois. So I can't help but think that they must have developed some type of opinion by watching these men come in and take care of business in Illinois. Yes, ma'am. But as far as the actual reason they moved to Illinois, I'm sure there is a reason. And by the way, they weren't all bad, right? The Parkers were remarkable, adapting, courageous people. My fourth great grandfather, in fact, in Illinois, was part of the Illinois, I'm so used to saying Texas legislature, the Illinois legislature. He fought really hard to keep slavery out of Illinois. He was a very, very anti-slavery guy. So much where he got people really disliking him because of that. So they were good people. Yes, ma'am.
You can still go to the, Isaac Parker's cabin is at Log
Yeah,
Cabin
TCU,
Village.
yeah.
And supposedly, he's the one who went into Fort Worth and identified her.
Yes.
And it was at that point, the story I had always heard, that they were giving up on identifying her, and he couldn't tell if it was her or not, but he showed pictures of her parents and kept saying Cynthia Ann Parker, and that's when she finally recognized or remembered, that's me, I'm Cynthia Ann. And he kept her for some time, but she kept trying to run away and go back west, and they kept retrieving her, so
Right.
finally they gave her to her brother
Went back to her brother,
in
that's right.
Tyler.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
she made
That's where she-
ropes.
yep.
Her daughter died of meningitis in all likelihood, and that was the end for her. She just,
Yeah.
she died
So
of a broken
part of
heart.
that is true, the picture thing
Pictures
cannot possibly be true, because her dad died in 1836.
They weren't doing
So,
any pictures any.
But I've heard part of that same story as well. This is what I mean, is that there's so many stories out there. Ultimately, we don't know what is 100% factual, but I've heard those same stories. It makes sense, you know?
Two of her three children, she thought, the daughter died, she knew, her Quanah was, she thought maybe was dead.
Yeah, and the
So
other son
then-
may be dead. She didn't know. After Pease River, she had no idea.
Sullivan Ross
She had no
was
reason
in
to
charge of the group that
So Ross
captured
was.
her.
That's right.
And they convinced her that her sons had both been killed and her husband
Yep.
at that battle. So she believed that they were dead.
Now, I love Sol Ross, and I love Texas, but what Sol Ross said was, I think he eventually made the story, maybe even when he was trying to run for governor, that I am the one who killed Quanah's, he didn't say Quanah's dad, but
Oh.
I'm the one who killed the main man,
Pita Nocona.
Nicona. Yeah, and so, I don't know, maybe he did, Quanah said no. So I guess we never will know that. But yeah, I mean, I love Sol Ross and all, but maybe there was some embellishment.
He was a Texan.
And I love
Texans.
Texans. Yeah.
Do we know anything about Quanah's 7 wives?
No.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And I'm not really the authority on that, but,
Okay.
yeah, my cousin's from Oklahoma.
Yeah, maybe we can get Tina to come
Mhm.
sometime.
Tina's great. Yeah. But they know a whole lot more about that than I do. Wish I could expand on that.
She had no reason to live, husband, children,
No.
That's right, yeah.
Well, stolen
but-
from her culture.
you know, like
Yeah.
taken away from her life.
Do we have any other questions?
Well, I just need to say, my name is Cynthia Ann. And my dad told me it was because of this story. Can you imagine?
Wow.
He was born and raised in Cedar, which is just south of Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And this story was told and taught in Texas history. And when we did, move to Waco, we went out to Fort Parker. And he told me the story. So I have been back to Fort Parker several times because the story means a lot to Texans.
Oh, yes, it does.
Yes.
Yes, it does, yeah. And if you ever get a chance, go out to Fort Parker. The lady running the show out there, they run on a shoestring budget. They're barely funded. Texas doesn't give them any money. They get money out of Limestone County, Groesbeck, and the Mejia, and then contributions. And if you've ever seen those walls of the fort, the replica of the fort, they're ginormous, and they need upkeeping. So if you ever get a chance, go out there and visit.
Oh, one other thing, there's a young lady that did her master's thesis in history at TCU about 15 to 20 years ago on Cynthia Ann. And her name was Meg Schmidt, and then she married, and so she's published under her married name, and I can never think of it. But she did an extensive research with primary sources, went to East Texas and found the descendants of the relatives, looked at paperwork, whatever. And at that time, at least, she dispelled a lot of the myths and told the way the story, closer to what the story really was. So you might have to do some digging to find her, but.
Well, I've been digging for a very, very long time, and I'm about 90% finished with the Parker manuscript. Problem is, there are many different routes to go with the Parkers. I mean, I could expand, for example, their time in Georgia, I could expand on that all day long, because they were encroaching on Native American lands at that particular time. But anyway, yeah, what's her name again?
It was Meg Schmidt,
Okay.
but and somewhere at my house I have her manuscript. She gave it to me
Okay.
to preview, but I could not put my hands on it easily.
Yeah, ma'am.
And she published, and I always intended to purchase her book. Her dissertation became her book. It's not real thick, for the life of me, I can't remember the name of it, but it's Meg Schmidt something. TCU, was where her dissertation was, filed.
Well, I did speak much longer than I had expected, and for anyone falling asleep, I apologize.